Parakstījāmies uz tādu ļoti dārgu avantūru. 640 000 bija iekārts, 730 pati ēka, un tad vēl kaut kā blakus kaut kā pār pa $1,5 miljonu. Investīcijas ir devušas necerēt labu rezultātu. Esam ļoti apmierināti. Protams, lielu lomu spēlē arī tas, ka Eiropas Savienība pusi no tā projekta mums finansēja. Šobrīd šī kūtī uz tām 200 kaut kādām 50 govīm, 2,5 darbinieki ikdienā tiek noslogoti. Bet jāņem vērā vēl blakus fermā pie mazajiem dzīvniekiem arī kāds pusotrs. Tā kā principā uz tiem 500 dzīvniekiem kādi 4, tā stabili 4 cilvēki. Un viens arī, kāpēc mēs tos robotus ielikām, man bija tāda stingra pārliecība, ja tu gribi panākt rietumu attīstību, tev jāpērk nākotnes tehnoloģijas, kas viņiem ir jaunums. Un tāpēc arī bija tas piemērs, ka atbrauc Holandas zemnieki, un viņi atbrauc un brīnās par tik veiksmīgu projektu. Un sieva saka, ka jūs atbraucāt savus robotus skatīties un brīnīties. Viņi nosmējās, bet tā ir. Tas ir vislielākais iegums - nauda un perspektīva. Šobrīd tas uzņēmums ļoti perspektīvs un interesants. Ja šeit būtu jādarbojas jāslauc ar rokām, es nezinu, vai tas pircēja loks, ja kādreiz izdevumi būtu pārāk liels. Tepat nav uz fermu. Mēs sēžam kaut kur, to jebkurā vietā pasaules malā attaisīt datoru un pastīties, ka tev izmet problēmas līdz sīkumam. Tur ir temperatūras, svari, apēstais daudzums, gremoši.
Automation in Ericsson site here in Tallinn, we have been working actually a long time. And some part of the process today is already fully automated and standardized. But now we are focusing more on the final assembly part and the testing part. So it's kind of a journey. Our biggest project we are running right now, we do in collaboration with ABB, where we are automating the final assembly of the latest Ericsson radio products. That is ongoing right now. We will install that end of this year. When it comes to automation, I think the first thing you think about is robots assembling products. But it's also very much in the future we talk about smart manufacturing. And then you need to connect all the processes. And get use of all the data. And then we have learned that we need a dedicated cellular network to really handle all the connected devices in this process. Connect all the robots. We also have automated guided vehicles moving around, sending a lot of data. So therefore we have, together with Telia here in Estonia, developed a private LTE network, or we call it dedicated cellular network. Of course, it needs to be a business case. Automation is costly. So you need to find this balance, where to automate and where not to automate.
Basically, what led us to this project, to these processes, is a trend basically in our environment, in our working field. All factories are putting more and more robots inside, and we see it as something that you cannot run from. We have some nice recent examples that are basically dedicated to better output. Nonetheless, some of them are to increase our quality, to assure our products would be in better quality. One of which is a stacking area in our lacquering line. Project is the only one in Baltic states. There is no other like that. The project includes automatic stacking with robots, and additionally it has area for reject takeout. Other project that we did ourselves is assembly line for flatpacks. We have, as you see, a product that consists of many elements. That is 6 flatpacks inside, and before that we had people manually stacking elements, and after our project we changed it to 2 robots. We increased our speed, we created better jobs for operators, and we reduced this manual labor. Usually when we calculate project, we take into account that it would pay back in 3 years. So this is something that we would like to invest in that case. When we calculate robots, rough price in our area is about 100,000 per robot, so when all the infrastructure goes together. The effect, of course, is better output, better profit, and after doing these recent projects, we increased our efficiency by 23% last year. Regarding changes in amount of people, so it reduces, but very, very slightly.
unfold the legends and the myth, Achilles and his gold, Hercules and his gifts, Spider-Man's control, and Batman with his fists. And clearly, I don't see myself upon that list. A while ago, here in Riga, I was riding a tram, and I didn't particularly like the conversation behind me, so I put my headphones on or in, and it was Coldplay playing, and it was this song, something just like this. I thought, oh, this is about our conference, because this is about how the labor market increasingly will look like, right? So there will be the Superman and Superwoman, as Andrea told us, for which there will be more demand and not enough supply. And then it might happen that there will be some people, well, who will be a bit left behind, who don't see themselves, so to say, upon that list. And then the question is, what do we do with that? So to dig a bit deeper into that issue, we have gathered an awesome panel. Actually, I would like you guys to ask you to join me on the stage. So please, well, it's not exactly Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman, but it's close to that. So we have Professor Andris Sørensen from Copenhagen Business School, who is actually, I would say, well known for publications on the subject area. So then next to him we have Meri Obstbaum, my colleague from the Bank of Finland, with a fancy title, Head of Forecasting. So your everyday job is, well, to tell how the future will look like, right? So then we have Maksims Jegorovs, Country Managing Director for Accenture, whom you also know for at least one of our previous conferences. And then last but not least, Ignas Mačeika, who is the head of Treasury at SBA Group in Lithuania. I guess you'll tell us later a bit more about SBA Group, what it is and what it does, so I will skip that part. And we also have an introductory presentation. And without any further ado, I would like to give floor to Professor Andris Sørensen for the introductory presentation, so please.
Thank you.
And the competition for the most concise introductory presentation is still on, and you have a good chance of winning.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the organizers, the Bank of Latvia, to let me give this opening presentation. It's a really, really big topic, and I have only a little time. So I will try to be focused, and especially I will not focus that much on employment. I would reflect on employment, but I would like to address to a higher extent technology adoption in manufacturing firms. It was really good that Andrea Basanini started out with his presentation because that made it easier for me to, I could almost skip some slides, but let me summarize. So, as we all know, automation has a large potential. Many jobs will potentially disappear. And so, the OECD has made calculations in the new report. I refer to McKinsey Global Institute that has also worked on this issue. What about jobs in the future? And basically what they find is that around half of all working hours in the global workforce can be automated with well-known or with known, today known technologies. There may be variation across across sectors, variation across skill groups or education groups, and also some type of jobs are more exposed to automation, especially middle-income jobs, that are more likely to be displaced. And this is because many middle-income jobs consists of routine-based tasks. Obviously, technology adoption is important for the potential to be realized. If firms do not adopt technology, we are not going to take advantage of automation. That's obvious. In the McKinsey report, they believe in their baseline that adjustment takes place until 2055. Then all automation advantages of existing technologies has been realized. And also the OECD has a forward-looking, I think it's probably 30 years ahead that was the case in the OECD study. However, what I want to stress is that there might even be a potential that is not realized today. There's potential out there that is not realized. And what we can see is that technology adoption seems to be low and slow. And by low, I mean there's a huge heterogeneity in adoption across countries, across firms, as I will show you. This talk is based on a research, partly based on a research project that I have carried out for the Danish manufacturing industry, where we have collected data on automation for Danish manufacturing firms. And if you have the interest, it is a paper that is forthcoming in an economic journal that is called Economic Policy. Let's get some hard evidence. So this is data from a source called the International Federation of Robotics. And so the International Federation of Robotics collects data from robot suppliers around the world. And this is the robot data that is mainly used for all the research that we have seen so far on robots. Earlier today, there was referred to a paper showing that local labor markets in the US are affected negatively when robots penetrates the labor market. These are these data. So what I have just randomly selected some countries, and so what we can see is that Germany and Japan has very high robot intensity rates as measured by robots per million hours worked. This in 2015. In the next layer, we have the Scandinavian, in the Nordic countries, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and also the US, where the intensity is around 1 to 1.5 robots per million hours worked. And Latvia, there is actually a blue column there. It's hard to see, and I mean, from the video clips we just saw, I think that we have seen all the robots in Latvia that has been implemented so far. There are not a lot of automation in the Baltic countries. We know from research on these data that that industries that invest intensively or higher robot intensity results in higher productivity. So there seems to be a potential that could be realized for the Baltic countries. Now I would like to turn to technology adoption across firms. So far we have only seen across countries. And so the data that I have here is some data that I have collected myself. This is data for a representative sample of manufacturing firms in Denmark. There are 600 firms in the sample. And so just for your information, in this work we developed a measure called the automation score. And this automation score means that if it's equal to 1, there's no automation at all in the production of the manufacturing firm. We're talking about the factory floor. If it's 5, it's fully automated, and then, of course, degrees of automation in between. And so we have collected data for 2005 and 10. I know 10 is a long time ago, but I also have some data from that are more recent, that are from last month, that I will refer to. But my point is to show you this figure and focus on the red columns. And so what we have here is a distribution of firms. So each column, red column, presents the share of firms that have the 5 different automation numbers. So around 5% of manufacturing firms in Denmark in 2010 had no automation whatsoever. If we think in terms of flow automation, then it is the 2 first columns. It's 45% of firms that have not automated, more or less not automated. At the other end of the scale, there is around 20% that have high automation. And so this result actually holds if we start to cut the data. If we look at more narrowly defined industries, we still see this big heterogeneity. If we cut data in relation to production methods, it may be batch versus line production. It's still a lot of heterogeneity. So this result holds for Danish firms. And when we move forward, we collect the data not for the same sample, though, only for small and medium-sized enterprises in Denmark last month, and it shows exactly the same result. There are some firms that are highly automated, and there are a lot of firms that are not. So the question is, why is technology adoption low and slow? Meaning, why is there's a lot of heterogeneity across similar firms, when firms actually benefit productivity and profitability-wise? In our paper that I referred to before, we show that there is a strong association between investments in automation and growth in productivity and changes in profitability. It might, of course, be optimal. It might be this is what it should be. Firms do not invest because it's the right decision. There might be differences because there are certain drivers that enforce some firms to make a decision to automate. So there might be drivers that are actually pushing technology adoption. And so in our work, we have identified one driver that is related to the competitive environment that the firms are in. So what we show is that firms that are really exposed to high competition from Chinese products, these firms, they automate more than firms that are not exposed to Chinese exports. However, there might also be barriers. There might be a bunch of barriers that firms do not invest in automation. And now, so this is not based on really hard evidence, but we have some hard numbers to present. And so I think right now I'm thinking about whether lack of knowledge might be a constraint for technology adoption. Firms do simply not know what to do. And so anecdotal evidence, when we collected our data, we visited many production sites, 25 production sites. We visited firms, and we walked around with managers. There were industry experts there as well. We had also engineers on board. And so it seemed to us that many firms simply didn't have the necessary skills to investigate needs and possibilities for automation. So this is anecdotal evidence. But I can also present some numbers because I have just collected these data again. And so what we have done here is that we have asked the survey question so that we are able to construct this objective automation score that I presented to you before. But we also ask firms to self-score how innovative their production processes are. And I would imagine if a firm has a low automation score, I would imagine that if firms were knowledgeable about they had a low automation score, then they would also give a low self-score measure on the innovativeness of their production processes. However, what we find is, that 27% that says that they have a low self-score measure, they actually also have a low automation score. But we also find that 37% of firms that with using our objective measure of automation, we find that 37% of these firms actually state that they have a highly innovative production processes. So that is kind of inconsistent. And this may be a little indication that this is where one could start to look or think about one should look here as policy makers. I said I will reflect a bit on the effects on the labor market. And so right now, the technical adoption is low at present, yet we just saw data that we expect robots to increase exponentially the coming years. So we should definitely look for labor market effects here. I would like to, I already mentioned it, and so did Andrea, on the findings for the regional local labor markets in the US, but I would like to point to a descriptive statistics. This is not research, this is just a thing I can observe in my data. What we should think about when firms start to introduce labor-saving technologies is that it reduces the required labor input per unit output. So we substitute, this is what economists say, we substitute from labor to capital. But there is an offsetting output expansion effect. If you really become more productive, if you lower cost, if you increase quality and all the good things you can have from automation, then you become more competitive and you might actually sell more in your market. And therefore there is an offsetting output expansion effect. And so which of these effects are most important are of course, a question of empirical question. And so, in Danish manufacturing firms, from 2005 and forward, we can see that manufacturing firms with high investments in automation have higher employment growth than firms with low automation, low investments in automation. So this is too messy to explain, and I'm out of time, but I guess that the slides will be there somewhere at some time. Is that right? Sure. We will see. We'll see if we will automate our slides. So my last point is more policy focus. My point is, I think that industry and education policy should play together here. We have talked about education policy quite some time today, but I think it's important to have, potentially important to have policies targeted at technology adoption, especially if many existing firms simply need some guidance in order to understand how to automate. And I have to come with an example from yesterday's news, where the chairman of the Danish metal workers union argue that the government should implement the following policy. They should make a library of robots, collaborative robots, that firms can borrow, so that if a firm think about automating production and do not really know whether it is the way forward, they can borrow a collaborative robot and try it out. Mm-hmm. They actually tried this policy in South Korea, and South Korea is a country according to the newspaper article. And South Korea is the country in the world with the highest robot intensity. So that might be a way forward, simply so that people can, firms can simply learn about technology adoption. But of course, education policies are extremely important, and if we implement industry policies that speed up technology adoption, then education policy, of course, is much more relevant. And then I put a graph here, which is kind of out of context. This is my last graph. And so this, just to show you the educational attainment in the population between 25 and 64 of the Danish economy, how that has changed in 40 years, and in 10 years. And so what we can see is that in 2009, the purple part of the column is 31% has a higher education. In 2019, that has increased to 40%. In my opinion, that is a relatively high, fast increase in skills upgrading. And at the same time, unskilled workers has dropped from 23 to 18%. So summary, there's a high potential for automation. Technology adoption, however, seems to be very, very heterogeneous. And why is that? Is it because of drivers or barriers? And so this is the discussion that I presented to you, and suggest that there might be some evidence, initial evidence, that we have to look into more rigorously to understand the barriers for taking up new technologies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andris. So please have some water. And thank you for your very interesting presentation. My main takeaway is that, you know, we have now these electric scooters standing in all possible places, and that probably in the future you will have these robots standing somewhere, and then you just scan their QR codes, and then the robot is yours for, say, 30 minutes or whatever time you need it to do something. But I actually wanted to ask you a follow-up question, and the follow-up question is about Mr. Donald Trump. Following from your presentation, so if we have now all these trade disputes and return of protectionism in some sense, how would that affect, or how might that affect then the progress of automation?
Well, I mean, the driver that we have identified comes from the China shock, and if trade with China and other low-wage countries is reduced, I would imagine that the competitive pressure will lighten up for some firms, and they would not have the incentive to do something.
Okay. Thank you. So it might slow down. In other words, trade shocks might slow down the take-up of automation. Okay, thank you. Let's move now on to Meri with some. Well, this was a very kind of zoomed-in view from the company perspective. So now we'll hear a bit more, I guess, macro perspective. Is that right? Yes. And hopefully or probably also a little bit about Finnish experience. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation to this conference. So my point of view, as you said, on technological change and the labor markets is a macroeconomic one. So when we look at specific jobs or specific sector, it's quite obvious that the workers will be affected by automation and robotization and all kinds of maybe even artificial intelligence, especially in the future. But my interest is how does the current wave of technological change affect the labor market as a whole? So what kind of changes do we see, and what kind of changes should we expect to see in the future? The recent wave of digitalization has again raised automation anxiety. So there are predictions that machines are taking the jobs, and that will lead to mass unemployment. However, there's a very long history of those predictions, even much longer than what Andrea Bassanini showed in his presentation for a few decades ago. So it has been ever since the outset of the Industrial Revolution, at least from then on, that technological evolution has been associated with these fears of new machines and equipment leading to permanent deterioration of employment. And John Maynard Keynes called this development technological unemployment, so he actually coined the term already in the 1930s. But as history tells us, none of these predictions have been true. Employment as a share of population has remained remarkably stable in the long run. So, for example, for Finland, we merged some historical series of national accounts, and we can see that even in a very long perspective, from the 1860s onwards, the quantity of work hasn't diminished. So the quantity of work as a share of population has always increased or stayed approximately stable. And now you shouldn't be misguided by the right end of the curve, because if you would add the past years of development where we've had economic growth, we would be back to the level where we were at the beginning of the 1990s. But what you can observe on this chart is that while the quantity of work has not decreased, of course the tasks performed have obviously changed. The proportion that worked in agriculture, for example, the blue area was approximately 80% in 1860, and now it's less than 4%. And that of services has also increased tremendously. But job creation as a whole has always outpaced job destruction. And this is the case in most advanced economies. So in that way, when we say that the effects have been low on the labor markets, that would be the case. The net effect is quite small. But if you look inside the labor market and how the tasks have changed and the structure of the labor market has changed, then the effects have been quite large, actually. But what are then the characteristics of the structural change in the labor markets now recently, in the past few decades? So in the academic literature on technological change and the labor market, this hypothesis of skill-biased technological change dominated the scene for a long time. That was thought to explain the increasing job creation in high-skilled occupation at the detriment of both medium-skilled and low-skilled workers. But in the recent decades, employment growth has been concentrated on both the high-paid but also the low-paid occupations, while the medium-paid occupations share has been diminishing in most of the countries. So that's the red bars in this graph. So this phenomenon is referred to as job polarization, and it has been widely documented, and it's been common in many of the advanced economies. So in the picture we have 16 EU countries, but this would apply also to many more advanced economies in general. So why has there been a decline specifically in medium-paid occupations? Well, the short answer is because of the extensive displacement and offshoring of routine tasks. So routine is here the key word. If you look at this table and classification by David Autor, you can see that both manual and cognitive tasks that are routine jobs are at greatest risk of substitution. So with the adoption of ICT, machines are taking over routine tasks. So what we mean by routine tasks, they are tasks that involve simple calculation, data processing, and mechanical rules that can be described step by step. And for example, clerical and industrial occupations at the middle of the wage distributions are such jobs. But there's also a very close interaction between technological change and globalization and the polarized job structure of advanced economies. So it's the combination of both of these. So technological progress has made it possible to move an increasing share of industrial production to countries where production costs have been lower. And many mid-level tasks in particular are nowadays subject to offshoring, like programming or accounting and so on. But in contrast, many low-skilled jobs cannot be outsourced because they require personal contact, for example, such as elderly care. So that would be at the upper right panel. So to sum up, the ICT revolution of recent decades has made the transition of new types of jobs abroad possible, and the major pay differences has made it profitable. And this is the main reason for the huge change in the global division of work, where G7 countries' share of global industrial production and of global GDP has decreased to less than half, while that of emerged economies, especially China, has surged. So the key issue here is that all tasks are not equally prone to computerization and to automation. So tasks that demand non-routine, intuitive judgment and common sense are much less prone to be automized. And I think as a general observation is that commentators often see these risks of which jobs will disappear, but they have much more problems in seeing the huge challenges that are related to substituting human labor for robots. And also all these calculations about how many jobs are at risk of disappearing maybe do distort the picture somewhat, because then we concentrate on, it's easy to see which jobs can disappear, but it's very hard to see which new jobs could come into their place. The declining trend for medium-paid jobs is also true for Finland. It seems, however, that the effects of technological change and of job polarization are very different in different countries. So this points to the fact that probably country-specific structures and institutions are very important in shaping how the effects of these global trends are on the domestic market. So in Finland, for example, we see that there hasn't been a very large increase in low-paid jobs. So partly this may be due to the classification of occupations. This is typically something that affects the results very much. But on the other hand, that could also be related to more traditional skill-biased technological change, as these trends might coexist on the labor market. But second, and more interestingly, and unlike in the US, job polarization, or this decline in the medium-paid jobs, is not reflected in wage developments in Finland. So what has happened in the US is that also the wage distribution there has been this hollowing out the middle effect. But this is something that we do not observe in Finland. Rather, our wages have increased the least for the low-paid and most for the high-paid, but the medium-paid are no losers in this comparison. So it seems that for the persons that have managed to keep their medium-paid job, the wages have been increasing much more than that for the low-paid. So this polarization of jobs, together with the absence of wage polarization, seems to suggest that wages have not fully responded to the changes in labor demand. Yeah, the point is that that country-specific structures and institutions may have a very big role in determining the country-specific effects. In addition to wages, also we don't see in Finland any effect of polarization on incomes. So also in medium income brackets, incomes have been rising, and they have been rising more than in the low income brackets. So even the people who have lost their medium paid jobs, they have been supported by the social security system, and their income hasn't fallen. Well, the flip side of the coin is of course the fact that instead of wages and income having adjusted, we do have a quite large unemployment. So that might be the way the Finnish economy then has adjusted to these changes. But this decline in medium paid jobs and earnings is the phenomenon that has triggered this international debate on the impoverishment of the middle classes, especially in the US. And globalization and technological change are blamed, even if they have globally generated huge welfare gains, and the way these gains are distributed seems to depend on country-specific policies. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll skip my follow-up question to you now and also leapfrog Maksims and go to Ignas because we heard now, well, first of all, we heard Danish perspective, Finnish perspective. We also heard or saw actually some slides with some bar charts where the Baltic states were barely visible in terms of robotization, but still I understand that things are not that bad. At least there are some companies, you heard from one also on the first panel, but it's also SBA Group, which has, as I understand, done some automation, in particular in Lithuania. And then, yes, Ignas,
okay.
Please, if you could share that experience.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you, Andris. I guess I'm here to represent more of a practical point of view of automation and robotization. So I'm going to start in a minute. But before that, I want to thank and reflect on a previous discussion, panel discussion, and thank Borja Gracia and Martin Kazaks for making Lithuanians proud today. Because, you know, this is the first time I heard that we overtook Estonians. And I guess, you know, when we have this probably a constant that the perception is reality. So I guess sometimes reality overtakes the perception. So thank you, guys. You know, in 2006, we implemented the first robot, and by 2020, our group will have 70 robots in place, or robotic solutions in place. And our group is comprised of 3 main business areas. That is manufacturing of furniture for IKEA. You've seen the videos. Those are from our peers, Vilnius Balde, but those represent, you can get a picture of how our factories look and what we do and how the automation solutions work. So this is more or less what we do in our factories, in 5 factories in Lithuania and Belarus. We also active in real estate segment and apparel business. But today I'm going to talk about manufacturing and why we use robots as a solution. You know, we have a joke, our engineers have a joke, why we choose robots instead of, sometimes instead of human beings. Because first, they don't ask for vacation. Second, they're never sick. And the third, they never enter into any labor union, so they can work 24/7. But you know, to be more on a serious side, there are trinity of gains that we get from robotic solutions. That is a process efficiency, faster, no stops, no delays, unhuman handling power, which I'm going to touch upon later a bit, and capacity. Second, there is a process quality. It's uncomparable with the men. It's stable, accurate. It's, you know, no human factors. They don't come to work after the argument with the spouse. You know, Their mood doesn't, the quality doesn't depend on the mood of the employee. The quality of the production doesn't depend on whether the robot is after 8-hour shift or not, which is the case, you know, especially handling the strenuous tasks for the people. And third is a much lower cost of operations. That all brings me down to one thing. You know, as a head of Treasury, I'm really responsible for the cash flow of our group. And when I have these solutions in place, when we have these solutions in place, I can really forecast much better. And at the end of the day, we can really gain from better profits, better cash flows, which is a beneficial for all of us, not only the shareholder, but all the other stakeholders. That is the state, employees, suppliers, clients, and so on and so on. Can you compete with robots? I guess not really. Should you? Probably not, you know. This is unavoidable. What we've seen today, what we have discussed today, I guess, you know, that's the future. So how should we adapt it? And I want to touch upon a very interesting point that I have discussed with my colleagues. Is robotization ethical? Since we see that there are job losses due to the fact that we automate some solutions. And I want to just all of you picture this. You all know IKEA, the stores. You go into store, you say you want to buy a table. You choose the table, you go to pick up the, in those big lines, the table, you take the big package, which is roughly 25 kilos a package. You put it on a stroller, you go, you put it in a car. Imagine that doing all shift long, taking a 25 kilo package from point A to point B, and would you want to do that for all of your life? Anyone? I guess not. Would you want your kids to do that for all of your life? I doubt it. And that's the key takeaway of robotizations. It's ethical, because that job that is automated, most of the part in the industrial world, because I'm talking about our company, is the job that really anyone doesn't want to do. And if they do, they face health problems, they face really big psychological problems, and so on and so on. This routine job, as you said, this is sort of a robot, job. And, we all have this "I am not a robot today" sign. So my sincere wish for you all is don't become one. Really. Because there are robots that, can do the job, monotonous job, without tiring, without complaining, much cheaper. And we are here much better than those. We are here to employ our mind. We are here to employ our capacity as a human being, which is not doing the monotonous, physically intensive, not ergonomic job. This is experience from our company, and then today, this year, we bought a robotic company. We were their main client, but it's called Robotex, and we are really eager to invest into that sphere, also as a client, but also as a business owner, since this industry is forecasted to grow exponentially. Up to 2025, the total value of robotic solutions will be almost 70 billion euros in the world, and that's the share we want to take as well. So I'll stop here, and can continue later on.
Okay, thank you. So you have to know that when you were asking about this 25-kilogram job, then it was audible in the audience. Somebody asked, "How much would you pay?" But I have. So that just shows you the mindset of Latvians. But I actually wanted to ask you a follow-up question. This kind of presentation about the merits of robotization, it sounded kind of almost like too good to be true. And then can you name at least one drawback that you have experienced either during the process of robotization or from robotization itself?
You know, there are always, you have to know what you do, because, for instance, we in Klaipėda, we produce 2.5 million units a year of the komodas, Malm komodas. Probably 10% of people have it at home. We have 700 employees there. And there are many robotic solutions, but still we have 700 employees. A couple of years ago in Sweden, there was a company that produced the same amount of the same stuff with 170 employees. Because it was automated, like fully automated, great stuff. But they were closed or had to restructure because they were a bottleneck in the product development. They couldn't be flexible anymore. So that's also, you know, the drawback of automation, that you have to be careful and you have to calculate quite precisely and forecast quite precisely what are you going to do and how sustainable it is. Since if you automate too much, you lose the power to be flexible. And for the clients and for the users, and with the shift towards the e-commerce, that is one of the key advantages and advantages for the companies, for the suppliers to keep in mind.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. So now I'll finally, last but not least, turn to Maksims. And we've been so far discussing more automation, robotization, but in our panel description we also had artificial intelligence included, and that's kind of the next step, that you have machines that are learning themselves and becoming more clever, if I might say so, with every next step or every next operation. And then, okay, we saw also this relatively low uptake of automation in the Baltics. So how is the situation with artificial intelligence here in the Baltics? Is that complete science fiction, or is there something tangible already going on?
Well, there are people working on artificial intelligence in the Baltics and in Latvia, so there is quite a lot of research ongoing. But unfortunately, I think it is also a matter of scale. Right, because for example, in Latvia, we're pretty proud with, let's say, our quantum computing group. But on the other side, if you compare the level of investment Latvia does in quantum computing, or for example, Finland does in quantum computing, it's absolutely non-comparable. I think we have something like 2 million a year, and then Finland, which does not invest too much comparing to other European countries, invests something like 20 to 30 million, right? Unfortunately, I think that artificial intelligence and automation may have an impact, and based on the current trend, will have an impact when more rich countries, more developed countries will become more developed, and less developed countries face a huge downwards risk of being even less developed. And I think it's important not to underestimate this trend. So if you look at the history of, let's say, industrialization, if we pick it up from 15th century up until now, then in 15th century, Italy was considered a very industrially developed country. Actually, Italy would be more developed in terms of their ability to produce stuff than the UK was. Then at the start of the industrialization, around 17th century, they decoupled, and then you can see it from average income people have in Italy compared to the UK. So they decoupled in around 16th century by memory, and they have never converged back. So if you look at the level of, at the difference of income in the UK and Italy today, there is, you know, close to whatever it is, 50% difference, and they never converged, right? So it is not really a given that within, you know, the most developed part of the world in Europe, you know, everybody is going to be just fine. That's not true. It really depends on how countries behave. That from what I see with our clients, and maybe I can share a story here. It's a Latvian client with whom we had a discussion recently, and our team has visited client factory. It's a production client, and together we've done a number of innovation workshops. So we were looking for input from the engineers of this firm of, you know, what can be improved. And then one of the things that we've identified that, you know, what you could improve would be quality control based on artificial intelligence, right? And then the solution would be based on a camera which follows, which sees the process, which can understand what's going on, and then we could build a machine learning model which would say, okay, here is a bug, right? And then we're having this meeting with the owner of the firm, and the owner is not Latvian. He's a European guy, but not Latvian. I cannot disclose names, so this is why I'm so. And then we explain this, and this guy, he has a manufacturing background. He was educated in outside of Latvia, and then he says, you know, he names firms who sell equipment who do exactly what we're trying to do now, right? So in a sense, we've wasted a lot of, you know, clients' time, our own time, but the insight was that, you know, the engineers didn't actually know, right? And I mean, that's the biggest threat that we have. Then in the way societies react, I mean, societies seem to react just like the frog reacts in this proverbial, you know, pot of milk. Societies don't do anything until there is a tangible threat in the form of a very strange politician, right? So going back to Trump, right? So nothing happens until we see something like that. Then I think the establishment, especially economic establishment, political establishment, we have a huge responsibility in front of our countries, because and I'm kind of not joking here. So again, to give you an analogy, a historical analogy, so why do you think Marxism never won in Europe from historical perspective? So there is actually a pretty simple economic reason, right? So as you may know, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, they wrote the manifesto around 1848. 1848 was the time of so-called Parisian protests, right? But those Parisian protests, they were followed with protests across Europe. And what happened across Europe is that after that, and you can see it in economic data, owners have raised salaries. So by the time of the end of First World War, or beginning of First World War, when political establishment was forced to engage people in democracy, in most of the countries, people would not vote enough for the socialist parties to win. There are very few exceptions which we know, right? So there is a reason, and this reason is not what we think, right? There was an adoption, because if you read history and then if you see, you know, in what conditions people lived in 1848, right? If those conditions would not have changed, we would need a revolution, right? So the question is, are we going to wait for something like that to happen? Because right now this seems to be the case, or are we going to change something? So in that sense, I think it's really good that we are not automating, and our clients are not automating things too quickly. Our clients are actively automating things. We actively work with our clients also from Latvia to automate office work, to automate production work. Artificial intelligence is part of that from the very beginning. We don't know, mathematically speaking, we don't know what are the limits of artificial intelligence, right? So this question mathematically is not resolved. But it is pretty clear that automation can leave quite a lot of people without the current work that they're doing. And it is pretty clear that society is not actively trying to manage that. So if you do a mental experiment saying that, you know, we can automate 90% of work, for example, and then 90% of people will not have anything to do. So are we mentally ready to make money with those 10% of people, but then redistribute money for the rest of the people who are not working, right? Which is, by the way, is communism, right? Because, you know, you earn and then you distribute. So this is the mental test. So what if we can automate just about everything, right? And there is nothing to do. So what do you do in this sense, right? So if you read today's discussion around taxation of robots, right? I'm not sure the society recognizes that, you know, this is an important question, right? And then if the amount of work that is automated is just going to go up, we will have to tax robots, right? I mean, in Riga, and then I guess in Old Vilnius, you can walk through Old Town and you can see different windows of different sizes, and all of us know why is that, right? Because taxes were on the size of the window on the... No, so you can tax different things, right? Then what we do as a firm, and then I really invite you know, everybody present to engage in the same thing, is to work with your ecosystem, with the type of the people that work for you and work for your industry, and invest in those people like hell, right? Because when automation will hit a certain industry, for example, those proverbial car drivers, it may be too late. And then people always react in the way people react, right? So we can change technology, but it doesn't seem, historically speaking, that people actually change. People stay more or less the same, right? We change our reactions in conditions, but the values of people are largely the same. Then, if you look in the last week's news, maybe to finish off, last week there was an announcement, Financial Times published an article saying that Google may have made an important breakthrough in quantum computing. Then quantum computing is a very important area. In a sense, quantum computing is computing to zero type of a thing, right? So if we compare the world in 1920s when there were no computers and the world today, the world will change once the quantum computer is introduced, right? Quantum computers may have an even bigger effect on artificial intelligence because they may be more powerful, right? Yeah, so that would be from me. Okay,
thank you for this philosophical, somewhat philosophical intervention. I have one follow-up question on which I want to push you. You mentioned that artificial intelligence might be the reason why advanced economies which can really afford to invest in it a lot and which have the size and the scale, that they would grow, so to say, even more productive, even richer. So can you give like one or two examples in which areas or which domains that is about to happen, or you would expect that to happen first?
Well, I mean, we live in a great region. We've got the Nordic countries, so if you have, you know, any questions around trends, you know, we just look at them, right? Because, I mean, they have 4 different nations with totally 4 different kind of approaches to innovation. But then, you know, you look at Sweden. Sweden has a very interesting immigration policy. They take in a lot of people. They have grown tremendously over the last 100 years. I think they've doubled in their size, while the other Nordic countries actually stayed in terms of their size. And we can see that in the way, for example, Sweden develops, you know, its businesses, right? We can see that they have retained, for example, engineering industry. You know, in all of those difficult conditions, we can see that they have retained, for example, automotive industry, and we can see that Volvo is doing great cars. Right, and then if you look back between, you know, 1970s and 2000 something, right, who would expect that we would continue to manufacture, profitably manufacture stuff in Europe, right? But potentially this was a wrong approach altogether. So if we look at the European policy, right, what we probably need to make sure is that we ensure that people within European Union are engaged and employed, right, rather than exporting work to the far, Asian countries. We should engage more with North Africa, because this is where the latest debacle came from, through wars and immigration, and help them to engage in productive work rather than in warfare, which potentially means that we also should have, our own army. Sorry for deviating, Andris. I know you want some computer stuff.
That's fine, and I have to tell the audience one thing, that we have to let Maksims go in about 5 minutes, because he has a very, very tight schedule. So I would like to throw it open now and ask if there are any questions from the audience, and specifically, of course, if there is a question to Maksims, because, as I said, he'll have to leave.
Catch a plane, yes.
He'll have to leave in 5 minutes, can we have the lights on? Yeah, there is one hand. Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello, Morten.
Yeah, it is me. I'm Morten Hansen,
yes.
Stockholm School of Economics in Riga, and also the Fiscal Council. Thank you very much. But I'm missing one dimension here, and that is this year that, given that the labor forces in all our 3 countries are declining, will continue to decline for many, many years, it's so obvious that this year should be done, isn't it? So shouldn't the focus be more on why are we still so much behind the Nordics, why are we behind the Germans, what to do in order to increase the amount of robots and AI and so forth?
Okay, so Maksims, you have an interesting question. So why are we so far behind in terms of automation compared to the Nordics?
Well, I mean, so one theory is that things should develop as they develop, right? I mean, can you, for example, make things faster than they happen, right? So, for example, we have forest industry here present, right? And then on one side, we can argue that, we could have asked them to do things faster, but if you talk to the people and then you try to understand the structure of what they do, they actually are pretty fast for the conditions that they were in, right? So they had to start in a way from scratch. They had to win their way into European markets. They were investing, right? And today, for example, if you look at what Latvijas Banka does, it's a pretty high-end type of a product, very high-end product in its own range, right? Then we have those good examples. I think what we're missing as a country, and in that sense is a very insightful question, is that we have too few people doing that, right? Then the sickness that we have as a country, I would say, is that people don't really understand that it is not enough to have a business which sells in Latvia. Nobody cares about that type of a business. I am once in a while teaching at the local MBA programs, and like in the early days of teaching, I got into an argument with the group of students. It was like really an argument. So I made a very simple point that if anybody thinks that we will now conquer the world with Latvian cheese, this is just plain wrong. And I was hugely surprised because nobody understood why I'm saying that, and people actually got emotionally offended. And then my argument was that if you look at the price of cheese, locally produced, ecological kind of nice cheese, it would be like 3 times more expensive than the French cheese, right? And people don't understand that, if French cheese is considered the best, and then there is Dutch, German, etc., not to offend any cheeses, represented in this room, then, so I was not, and I failed as a teacher because I failed to convince them, right? So I think this is the reason why we're still behind.
All right, thank you, Maksims. I guess we can let you go.
I'm really sorry, but please don't wait for me yet.
Before you emotionally offend any more people in this room.
Yes,
thank you very much.
Thank you,
thank you very much. But it's not the end of it, so we continue. And my question to Ignas also, would you want to jump in on that question, why there is so little automation in the Baltics? So you do it, okay, why don't other companies do it? What's your guess or opinion?
I think it's simple, it's a scale, lack of scale. You know? The automated production facilities, say the car manufacturers are the leading in this field. You know, they have built factories for a single model of the car, and then, you know, it adds up to the statistics, I guess. You know, Andris, you can comment on that, why it's so much different from Western world. But the lack of the scale in Baltic countries, which is I guess naturally from the size of the countries, from the size of the people, you know, we are so small compared to industrial regions of the world. Then you can reflect it on the numbers of automation.
Okay. Andris, you want to jump in on that? Because, I mean, Denmark is not, I mean, with all respect, but it's not that much bigger in terms of size than Lithuania. So could size be the difference?
No, I think that I guess that the important difference between the Danish economy and the Latvian or Baltic economies is that unskilled workers are pretty expensive. So we have a very compressed wage structure, and unskilled workers are expensive. So I think that's probably what motivates many manufacturing firms. Okay,
so we're back to the question, how much do you pay? Okay, Meri, you want to jump in on that or not really?
Yes, well, I will comment from the Finnish point of view that, of course, it's not the same thing as automation, but there is some research in Finland about the huge rise in the whole Nokia cluster. And in that research, for example, the availability of competent workforce has been one main thing that comes up each time.
So would you advise a country to have its Nokia?
Well, it didn't went well for us either then at the end, but at least I would say that education at all levels, not only adult education or vocational education, but starting from preschool is really important.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So let us look at Slido. We have some questions in Slido as well. If medium income jobs will be gradually automated away, does it mean that automation will increase income inequality? I guess that's back to you as well.
Yes, okay, so what I tried to say earlier is that no, it doesn't necessarily mean that it increases income inequality. So in Finland, for example, what we observe is that we have had a huge drop in median paid jobs, but no increase in income inequality, almost no increase in income inequality. And of course we have very redistributive policies in place. I think that among the OECD countries, we're in the top 3 of the countries which most redistribute factor income, so that at the level of disposable income, the income inequality is one of the most equals in the world, actually. Mm-hmm. So that has probably prevented income inequality. But that has not been our main concern. So this increase in wage inequality or income inequality, which has globally been discussed in this discussion about job polarization, that has not been our concern. But then the flip side of the coin, as I said earlier, is that maybe the adjustment has been on the labor side. And the concern is that these people who lose their job, whether it's because of polarization or more traditional skill-biased technological change, that they are not able to find new jobs, that the labor market is not very dynamic, so there is a risk of long-term unemployment and even exclusion of the labor market more permanently.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. We have one question for Andris, I guess, as well. Employment growth of automating Danish firms was higher than of those not automating, but did they keep the same employees or not?
I would really be happy if I could answer that question. I haven't looked into it, but I plan to. We have just started to look into the labor market effects. We have focused on productivity, profitability issues. But it's a good point. It's a really good point to see whether selection is part of the story in the employees of firms, whether.
Okay, that's a very prudent academic answer now, but if I may push you on that a bit more, if you were to make a guess, I mean, how much of that is due to upskilling and how much is really like middle skilled or medium skilled people out and high skilled people in?
Yeah, you know, on the one side, on the other side. No, actually, when we look at, so what I want to do is look at this, the individual employees, but when we look at the firm aggregates, we cannot see a lot
okay.
of skill upgrading going on.
Okay.
So I don't know whether we talk about skill bias and technological change in a way that when we think of IT systems and digitalization and IE probably also that we need more employees with university degrees. I think in terms of automating production sites in the factory floor, not a lot of skill upgrading needs to take place. Many of the unskilled or skilled employees can learn to operate the equipment is my take, but I don't know whether you have skill upgraded.
My hope to answer this question is now Ignas. So when you were doing this in the past, did you hire new people or did you upskill the existing people, just train them so that they can operate whatever the robots, the machine?
I think it's a complex topic. I mean, and there were both ways. Summa summarum, we have not decreased the number of employees in our group throughout this process. We still have about 5,000 people, and this is a constant, more or less, figure, although we have grown quite substantially. So definitely we have shifted some competences with others, and you know, with one automation project, we count like on average probably 6 people throughout 4 shifts or 3 shifts could be replaced by one robot. That is, you know, if you add up, it's more than 400 throughout these 10 years. But as I said, I mean, you know, while business is growing, you need extra capacities, you need extra qualities, and different qualifications. So, of course, if the person is able to requalify towards working with the machine, which is not a super, you know, heavy job, but it requires different skills, then we focus on that. But sometimes we bring in other engineers and other people in order to govern all the processes in a different way than it was done before.
If I may ask a related question, so how did the average pay increase, or well, I suppose it increased quite a lot as a result of automation. So if you look, say, 10 years back or 15 years back at the SPA group. I mean, roughly, of course, I don't expect you to give the exact number.
No. You know, the pay overall, the cost of labor throughout last 2 years, we've seen a dramatic increase in the salaries of our employees. You know, on average, probably 12% a year. And 2017, 2018, and then we're still having that fact. But I'm not sure if that could be attributed to the automation on standalone basis, because that's multiple effects that affect that.
Okay, thank you. More questions from the audience? There's one hand in the back. Yes, please. Just tell us who you are.
Thank you. My name is Irina Sennikova, Director of Riseba University of Applied Sciences. And my question, in fact, is related to some words which are in the title, the future of work. When we talk that the robots are replacing routine tasks, I think it's only natural progress of the society. And similar discussion would have taken place probably during the first industrial revolution when workers were crushing the machines for similar reasons, and the arguments could have been similar. But what we also read now, and many of the thinkers tell, that the nature of the professions, traditional professions, medical doctors, legal lawyers, managers, high-paid expert jobs also can be replaced by artificial intelligence. And we already see, for example, in Hamburg, the hall, music hall, which is designed completely by the machine. Coming from education, my question is, what can educators do, preparing the future, people for the future, take into the education process to make sure that they adopt to the new reality, being prepared that the jobs are not really taken off the labor market as such, expert jobs, I mean.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I look at Meri first, I guess.
Yes, well, of course, predicting how the future of work would look like and what kind of skills will be needed in the future is virtually impossible. But one thing that can be said is that at least up until now, it has been so that the higher the education level, the better the labor market outcomes. So education has been and is still a very good insurance against negative labor market outcomes, but it would be impossible to predict which areas or which universities, which vocational education schemes should be supported. Maybe the nature of the future of work is that competitiveness is not about these big industries or sector, but more and more about these individual tasks. And also the changes are very rapid, and that makes them even more difficult to predict than previously.
Thank you. Yeah, Andris or Ignas. Yeah, Andris.
I think it's a really important question, and it's really difficult to answer. I mean, what I didn't mention in my introduction was that I think a very important area to become wiser is to understand which skills that are substitutes and which skills that are complements to new technology, meaning which skills enrich, go together with technology, which are simply substituted by technology. I think that is something that is extremely important to figure out. And before we know that, it is hard to actually give a concrete answer. I think technical educations are still going to be really important. So we have some. We can see some results in our relatively small data set that firms that are located in areas where there is a big supply of technical workers in relative terms, these firms tend to automate more than in other areas, suggesting that technicians are important to make the automation work.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Ignas, you want something?
I'll be bold here, and I have two ideas, very precise ones. As a father of 3 kids, and my oldest one is just started school last year, I spent some time with him and I checked his curriculum, which has barely changed from my own. That was 30 years ago, 30. And of course, that's not a Finnish example. We know Finland, and we put it as a flagship state for the education. But at least in Lithuania, the curriculum has not changed so much. But the business and the way we do business has changed dramatically. So one thing, stop pushing kids when they are 16 to choose their profession for life. Because now when you're in 11th grade, you have to choose if you are in social or engineering, or if you like maths or physics, or and I think that's old school now, and it should be taken away from our educational system. That's one thing. The other thing is that just imagine if universities were rewarded based on the salaries of their graduates. If the remuneration package for the academics, for the deans, for the professors would be related with how successful their kids are, how successful their students are. Would that change the way they work? Would that actually increase the cooperation with the companies, you know, going into business and asking, what do you need? What kind of engineers do you guys need? And then getting a reward after 5 or 10 years, doesn't matter, or in all these 10 years, having a 5% of the pay of your most successful students, graduates, would that change the way we work and study? I think yes.
Okay, that's a provocative question, but let's not go into that. So we are sitting here between you and lunch, but I have one final question to the panel, and I have time for one more final question from the audience, if there is one. Okay, Ulds, yeah, you get it. So since there was nobody else, you took already a lot of time today, but please, I mean, go on.
Okay, Andris mentioned that actually lack of knowledge on how to automate is or might be an important obstacle to automation. Then Maksims also told us a story that he has walked a bumpy road with his client just because of the lack of the knowledge on the automation and the automation solutions that have already been already developed in the industry. But then Ignas looked quite optimistic with, about his experience and very satisfied with his experience. And I have a question to Ignas. Where did you acquire the knowledge on how to automate? And judging from your experience, is there anything that you have wished from the policymakers? Any assistance, and what kind of assistance to smooth the automation process? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I am really honored to receive this question, but I'm afraid I'm not the one to answer it. You know, I've been in the finance field for all of my life, so I'm not an engineer. And what I am sure that we in our company, we have people that would be able to give you a written answer in that, and that would be way more of the better quality than I could actually give it to you. But, you know, as such, I think, as I said, the educational system, the immigration policy, we try to actually, you know, in Baltics, we still try to close the borders for the educative engineers that are coming from Belarus, from Ukraine, from Russia, and I think the governor of the Latvian Bank in his initial speech, he mentioned that workforce is cheaper. I don't want to stress that it's cheaper. It's not, because we have in Lithuania it's not. When we import the people from say Vietnam, from Belarus, from Ukraine, we pay them similar salaries, same salaries, or even higher. We give them the tools to earn higher salaries. The key difference is the motivation, the self-motivation, and the determination to work and deliver the result. And, you know, in that sense, I guess, you know, if we would open up a bit more of the borders to import the workforce that is self-motivated and has a very clear purpose why they come here, that would also increase the total efficiency of our workforce that we talked about. But that, I know that doesn't answer your direct question. So if you really want to hear that, we can discuss that, and I'll ask my colleagues to give you a precise answer for that.
Okay, thank you. So that's the end of the questions from the audience, but I have one final question to ask the panelists. And it's, well, now given this transition to the new world with more automation of routine jobs and, okay, then either, well, low-skilled jobs or high-skilled jobs, and this hollowing out of the middle. So it's happening, so it's something unavoidable. So the question is now only, as we already discussed, how fast it will happen, and whether it's always wise to speed it up to the maximum, because we might get some political backlash and some issues like that. But my question still is, if you were now to give one piece of advice to the policymakers, to the government, parliament, whatever, about how to, let's say, not maybe even speed up this transition, but just to make it smoother, okay, maybe. So that would be an appropriate question. So what would that one piece of advice be? Who wants to start?
I can, yeah. In Buddhism, there is a saying that if you talk, you only say what you know, but if you listen, you have a chance to learn something new. So I would really encourage the dialogue with the business, you know, between the policymakers and the business owners, entrepreneurs, and without this perception, which most of the time is reality, that there is an evil on a business side and there is a good on a social side. That's not the case, you know. So this dialogue and mutual listening, I would believe, open up so many doors to come.
Great, thank you. So we have one more philosopher on the panel. No, Meri.
Yeah, well, I don't know how concrete this is, but I think that there is no silver bullet, so no specific policy that you can apply, but the strategy should be for a small open economy, as for the Baltics, and also probably for Denmark and Finland, to our comparative advantage in this is in the high skill end of the labor market. So if we want to succeed in the future, probably the way to go is to support the creation of high-skilled jobs. But of course, at the same time, while we strive at increasing the share of high-skilled jobs, we should take care about also that low-wage job can be created and not priced out of the market.
Okay, thank you. Andris?
I think actually I would participate in Ignas' suggestion. I think it would be really welcome to get a lot of information from firms in order to figure out whether the situation is optimal. Is it optimal not to invest at all? What is driving the automation investments, and what is the obstacles? So I think before coming with any policy suggestions, this needs to be known to a high extent.
Okay, thank you. Uldis already also kind of summarized our panel, so I will not do that now. Basically, actually want to end the panel with the same thing I started it with. And it's again Coldplay and the Chainsmokers. It's the continuation. But she said, where do you want to go? How much you want to risk? I'm not looking for somebody with some superhuman gifts, some superhero, some fairy tale bliss, just something I can turn to, somebody I can kiss. So obviously, and hopefully also that stays the same for quite some time or forever, hopefully, that there are some domains of human life which will not be automated and invaded by artificial intelligence. As Ignas already told you, you are not robots, right? So stay human. That might be the greatest competitive advantage in the time of robots. And as Chris Martin would say, take care, God bless you, and goodbye.
Which will be given at the other end of the hall. But before that, remember, we have special guest. He has some final words to say, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time. I received gigabytes of new information I need to think about now. Non-robots, please enjoy your lunch. We, robots, don't need one.
Liels paldies!